This submission is a transcript of a commentary piece that fiercely criticizes Candace Owens and utilizes a psychological concept called the Zygarnic effect to explain how she manipulates her audience regarding a conspiracy theory.
And while the material features excellent pacing and really good conversational energy, we need to focus today on elevating its structural and thematic impact.
Absolutely. Calibrating the emotional intensity of the personal critiques will allow the fascinating psychological analysis to take center stage.
Yeah, because right now the material relies heavily on some really intense, emotionally charged language. It kind of shoots itself in the foot right out of the gate.
It really does.
We're looking at phrases calling the subject an evil soul or claiming she has a black heart. I mean, they even refer to her as a raging bitch at one point.
Wow, yeah. That level of ad hominem attack actively alienates the listeners who might otherwise engage with the genuinely compelling, evidence-based argument about psychological manipulation.
Exact. It completely overshadows the cleverness of the critique. The listener is forced to focus on the writer's obvious disdain rather than the subject's actual behavior, which is the interesting part.
Right. So you need to dial back those visceral personal insults to create a more constructively skeptical and clinical tone. Let the subject's own actions serve as the primary evidence of her character. Because the goal is to corner the subject with their own behavior, not just to shout them down.
For instance, instead of calling her an evil soul, frame her actions as deeply calculating or cynical. It elevates the vocabulary from a playground insult to a real behavioral assessment.
That makes a lot of sense.
Or look at the section discussing her failure to understand the deep friendships at the Turning Point USA office with Erica and Stacey Sheridan. Right now, it's framed as this aggressive insult about her not having any real friends to be bridesmaids in her wedding.
Right. It feels very petty.
Yeah, so present that as a clinical observation of her professional isolation instead. Note that her inability to comprehend a supportive, collaborative workplace environment reflects a deeply transactional world.
Which is a much stronger point.
Exact. That becomes a devastating critique of her professional character, making the argument feel undeniable rather than vindictive.
But let me push back gently here. Is there a risk that by cleaning up the language too much, we strip away the raw, authentic anger that this specific audience might actually be tuning in for?
It's a fair question.
Because we see a lot of commentary formats that thrive on those unvarnished, fiery takedowns. If a creator sanitizes their script, don't they risk sounding kind of robotic?
Well, we have to distinguish between hot anger and cold anger.
Okay, break that down for me.
So hot anger is the name-calling, the visceral venting, the caps lock ranting, basically. It's momentarily cathartic for the writer, sure, but it is so easily dismissed by critics.
Right, they just label you a hater.
Exactly. They claim you're acting irrationally, and they move on without ever engaging with your actual premise. Hot anger gives the target an escape hatch.
Because if I start screaming at you, you don't actually have to address my argument. You can just point out that I'm acting unhinged.
100%. Cold anger, on the other hand, is what you achieve with a clinical, skeptical tone. It doesn't give them that out. When you dissect someone's manipulative behavior with the precision of a surge, devoid of all that screaming, it is utterly devastating. The facts do the damage for you.
The audience feels the weight of the condemnation because it feels objective. It doesn't feel personal.
Right, and you can see how the writer already has the tools for cold anger built into the script. The montage where they string together all those clips of the subject repeatedly claiming, "We're getting close to a breakthrough."
Oh, that was great.
That does all the heavy lifting. Showing a compilation of someone using the exact same stalling tactic 20 times in a row leads the listener naturally to the conclusion that this person is manipulative.
You don't need to tack on the phrase black heart to make that point. The behavior itself is glaringly cynical.
Exact. Like if we were to rewrite that bridesmaids line live to transition it from hot to cold.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the original is, she doesn't have actual deep friendships with people. Enough people to be bridesmaids in her wedding.
Right.
A cold anger rewrite would be something like, her bewilderment at the loyalty between her former colleagues reveals a massive blind spot. She interprets every relationship as a transaction, rendering her incapable of understanding genuine workplace solidarity.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that lands significantly harder.
Right?
Because you aren't attacking her personal life anymore. You are diagnosing a fundamental flaw in her worldview that informs the manipulation you're about to expose. It builds a foundation of credibility for the writer.
And that credibility is the currency you need to spend on the heavier psychological analysis later in the piece.
Which is so crucial.
If you blow all your credibility on calling someone a raging bitch in paragraph 2, the listener just isn't going to trust your academic breakdown of cognitive psychology in paragraph 10.
No, they'll have totally tuned you out by then, which brings up another great point. That cognitive load of processing hot anger versus cold anger doesn't just apply to vocabulary.
Right.
It applies to the sheer volume of arguments the audience is being asked to juggle. Streamlining the core thesis by separating the tradwife hypocrisy argument from the conspiracy manipulation argument will significantly strengthen the overall impact.
Yeah, the piece currently attempts to tackle two distinct, extraordinarily heavy themes at the exact same time.
It's just too much.
On one hand, it attacks the subject's hypocrisy regarding her trad wife claim, noting that she works all day instead of staying home with her kids or, making her husband sandwich. But then on the other hand, it tries to unpack a really complex psychological phenomenon, the Zygarnic effect, regarding how she cultivates her audience.
This dual focus drastically dilutes the power of the psychological revelation. I mean, the listener has a limited budget of cognitive attention.
Absolutely.
When you force them to evaluate a sociological argument about traditional gender roles and feminism, and then immediately ask them to switch gears to evaluate cognitive psychology and cult dynamics, you just exhaust them.
The brain literally stops processing the nuance.
So choose one primary narrative thread for this specific segment, ideally the Zygarnic effect, as it is the most novel and analytically strong point.
Yeah, and just save the tradwife hypocrisy for a completely separate, dedicated discussion.
It feels like trying to prosecute someone for a minor traffic violation and a major bank heist in the exact same breath.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Like, Your Honor, this defendant stole $50 million from the Federal Reserve, and furthermore, she was speeding in a school zone on a Tuesday.
Right. The minor charge completely distracts from the brilliance of uncovering the complex heist.
And the Zygarnic effect is the bank heist here. It is a brilliant, elevated, and entirely original angle to bring to this internet drama.
Burying the lead by complaining about someone not making sandwiches is a massive missed opportunity to position this commentary as top-tier media analysis.
But okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Isn't her hypocrisy central to why the audience dislikes her in the first place? If we cut the tradwife segment entirely, do we lose the motive behind why she manipulates people?
I see what you're saying.
Doesn't the audience need to know she's a hypocrite to buy into the idea that she's running a psychological con?
Well, I would argue the manipulation itself is the core offense, and the motive is simply audience capture and engagement farming.
Okay.
You establish that motive through the montage of her teasing the conspiracy. The tradwife stuff is a completely separate sphere of hypocrisy.
That makes sense.
Mechanics of conspiracy theory. To streamline this, completely remove the entire tangent about whether she sees her 4 kids or serves her husband sandwich. Just lift it right out of the script.
And then we replace that section with a deeper, more luxurious dive into Bluma Zygarnic and Kurt Lewin's psychological study.
Yes, please.
The text touches on the fascinating anecdote of the waiter who remembered unpaid orders far better than paid ones, but it just rushes past it.
It really does. Expand on that anecdote. Draw a tighter, more detailed parallel to how the subject uses never completing the idea to keep her audience acting like gullible cult members.
We need to unpack why this works neurologically. The Zygarnic effect isn't just a vague itch. The human brain is essentially a pattern recognition machine.
Right.
When a pattern is left incomplete, when a loop is opened but not closed, the brain categorizes that incomplete task as an active threat or a high-priority puzzle. The prefrontal cortex literally cannot disengage.
When the waiter's transaction isn't closed, his brain holds on to the details, keeping the tab active in his working memory. It consumes cognitive bandwidth. So when this commentator says, we're getting close, over and over, she is deliberately creating an open cognitive loop in her audience's minds.
They literally cannot let the conspiracy theory go until she gives them the conclusion, which she never does.
Never.
That is exactly how cult dynamics take root. You keep the followers in a perpetual state of unresolved tension. It's the same mechanic used in soap operas and reality television, but weaponized for political or social conspiracies.
And by taking the time saved from cutting the trad wife segment and investing it into unpacking this neurological mechanism, the writer transforms a standard internet takedown into a genuinely educational moment.
Oh, for sure.
You're teaching the audience the exact psychological schematic of the trap they are falling into.
Which gives the listener an incredible amount of value. They aren't just getting drama.
They're getting a framework they can use to analyze other media they consume.
It elevates the author's brand from angry commentator to insightful media critic.
It fundamentally shifts the dynamic. You're handing the audience the blueprints to the haunted house, so they know how the jump scares work. That builds immense loyalty between the creator and the listener.
Exactly.
But that cognitive exhaustion we just talked about, juggling competing arguments, it doesn't end with the conspiracy theory itself. The writer actually introduces a completely new type of jarring whiplash right at the end of the piece,
Oh yeah, the ending.
creating a strategic buffer between the intense conspiracy discussion and the sponsor read will prevent a jarring tonal whiplash for the audience.
Moving immediately from a heavy discussion about psychological manipulation, the mechanics of cults, and the morbid topic of a murder conspiracy directly into a lighthearted, casual ad for Aria gray hair prevention creates a bizarre and uncomfortable disconnect.
It really does. It's like downshifting a car from fifth gear straight into first. The transmission just drops out.
Perfect analogy.
The listener's brain needs a clutch, a moment of neutral space, to safely shift from a high-stakes conspiracy into a consumer mindset. Right now, it undermines the seriousness of the preceding analysis and makes the sponsor read feel completely out of place.
So you need to insert a thematic bridge or a clear, definitive hard break. You have to give the listener a moment of liminal space to digest the heavy psychological concept before you pivot them into a lifestyle sponsor.
For a structural approach, you could implement a distinct musical bumper or a standardized audio cue that clearly signals the end of the commentary segment.
Yeah.
This is your hard break. It acts as an auditory palate cleanser, letting the brain know one type of content is ended and another is beginning.
Or, if you want a more thematic pivot, actively acknowledge the shift in tone. You use the thematic momentum of the essay to gently carry the listener into the ad.
How would that sound?
You could write a transition that says something like, while we can't control the psychological tricks internet influencers play on us, we can control how we take care of ourselves, especially the stress that might be giving us gray hairs.
Ah, that's smooth. As an audience member, I appreciate that. It respects the listener's journey. But let's look at this from a pure metrics standpoint for a second.
Okay.
Assuming the audience here makes content, does an abrupt transition like the original one actually cause listeners to emotionally disengage? Will we see a visible dip in retention analytics when a transition is this harsh, making them less likely to use the promo code at the end of the day?
100%. Advertising in an audio format is entirely dependent on trust and alignment, what we call the parasocial relation.
Right.
When the listener experiences tonal whiplash, their psychological defenses instantly go up. Their physiology actually reacts. If they are deep in thought about a murder conspiracy, dropping a promo code triggers a sudden break in the suspension of disbelief. They feel jolted.
Because 1 second you are their trusted guide through the dark waters of internet cults, and the next second you are a salesperson pushing shampoo.
Exactly.
The illusion of intimacy is shattered.
A thematic bridge gently guides them from an analytical headspace into a receptive consumer headspace. It maintains the creator's credibility. It says, hey, we've just talked about something heavy. Now let's take a breath and talk about self-care. It preserves the integrity of the content while actually making the ad read significantly more effective and trustworthy.
The advertiser gets better conversion rates, and the listener doesn't feel like they've been ambushed.
It also prevents the sponsor read from feeling like a chore that the host is just trying to rush through. If you can weave it into the fabric of the show, it feels like an extension of the value you're providing.
Taking the extra 5 minutes to write a custom thematic transition for every single sponsor read is one of the highest return on investment activities a creator can do. It protects the art and serves the business simultaneously.
It really does.
All right, let's briefly summarize the core takeaways from this session. First, ensure the emotional language doesn't overshadow the brilliant psychological analysis by dialing back the visceral ad hominem attacks in favor of a clinical, calculated tone. Second, focus the argument strictly on the Zygarnic effect by completely removing the competing trad-wife tangent, allowing the strongest thesis room to breathe. And third, build a smooth, intentional thematic bridge into the sponsor read to prevent tonal whiplash and preserve audience trust.
And for our actionable summary, we highly recommend the writer implement these changes by doing a dedicated tone pass on their next draft, specifically hunting for and neutralizing overly aggressive adjectives.
Yes.
We also suggest physically cutting those secondary hypocrisy arguments
and saving them in a separate document for future material. And finally, getting into the habit of writing dedicated, custom transition sentences for all ad reads.
We warmly invite the listener to submit their revised work or any future materials back in for another critique. Going back to where we started, you don't need to throw every wild punch in a street fight to win the argument.
Nope.
Sometimes a single surgical strike, a well-built, precisely delivered case, is all it takes to leave a lasting mark.